Hey guys, holy cow. We wrapped up video number 17 and 18 in this series on abuse, focusing quite a bit on my second oldest brother, the golden child in the family. I'm the scapegoated child. The oldest brother is the narcissist. And I'll tell you what, if you have not had a chance to watch any of the content in this series on abuse, we're getting into the thick of it. And it is designed to be chronological. All these videos, it kind of tells a story, but hopefully you can pick up wherever you want to, including this video number 19 in the series on abuse, and get relevant, applicable information that's helpful on your own journey. Now, we did like the intro and the reasons and why we're doing this series and my motivation for doing this series. In the beginning, we worked into some bullet points and then an overview, and then like around video number 11 through video number, I think it was like 15 or 16, where we were talking about my parents and their parents and my parents' upbringing and how that played such a vital role in their marriage, how they were a married couple and it was not good, and how they parented, which was not good. And as a team, as individuals, the dynamic in the home, it was just mass chaos for me growing up. Now, when I was really, really little and my parents had a good relationship, probably up until about the age of 7 or 8 for me, when things started to go south. But I do have very, very positive, a lot of positive memories from when I was really little. But I think that they're very piecemeal, because I think a lot of what wound up happening in my childhood and in my young preteen and teen years and how I developed were the result of how things transitioned from when I was very little into those ages and stages, because neither one of my two oldest brothers are healthy, and I wasn't healthy either up until 2 years ago or whatever, when I started counseling and started looking in the magnifying glass at all the little stuff from my past and putting the pieces of the puzzle together and looking in the mirror and exploring everything about my family and the dynamics and the relationships and how unhealthy they all are. And basically, when my counselor said, you're taught healthy boundaries and how to be in a healthy relationship of any kind, friendship, colleague, family, boyfriend, whatever, when you're little by your parents. And I went, that's not the childhood I had. My parents didn't teach me that. When I was growing up, I had 0 examples shown to me by my parents of healthy, strong relationships between the two of them or otherwise. Their friends, their colleagues, nothing. I never had a good example of a family or a relationship with anybody to set an example for me as a child growing up, where I could reference back and look up to and look to for guidance and all that other stuff. So continuing on, now I had mentioned in video 16, 17 that I was looking and focusing at my two oldest brothers who, by virtue of our birth year and birth order, us three were close in age and therefore close in proximity within the household, and were kind of a cluster of siblings on our own, because there's the 3 of us with 2 years each between us. And then there was a gap of 4 years. And then there were 3 younger siblings that had 2 years between each of them. So there were like 2 cliques of siblings in our family, even though we were all raised in the same home. By virtue of physicality and age and birth order, we were just 2 clusters. And so most of my time was spent in my younger years in the presence of my 2 older brothers, who were very unhealthy, very traumatizing for me. And I developed a lot of problems, not just because of them, but also because of my parents and the unhealthy way that they parented me. So now we're getting into more of how I was internally around the age of 13, 12, 13, kind of like junior high into high school years, when things like the age of 7 or 8 through like the age of 11 or 12 were the transition years where I started noticing that things were not as they seemed and things were not good. But around the age of 12 or 13 was when I'd had it up to here. and I had noticed and decided I wasn't happy. This is not good. Life is not the way it should be, but I didn't know anything more than that. I just knew that I was not happy. I didn't have anything. I had no identity. So I'm going to get into that now. And this is where it's kind of like, you can kind of tell, like in one of my prior videos, I mentioned how I run an art business now. And I had mentioned a reference to how I was going to get to tell you about that and how relevant it is in a minute. And then I wound up not being able, because of time constraints, to get into it in that video where I mentioned that. So here we are now, and it's going to come up now. So by the time I was in junior high, like I mentioned, the angst and frustration in me was so great that I really felt empty. I felt like a searching and a longing and an emptiness. I was wanting, back then I didn't know this, but now looking back, I remember how I felt. And this is when a lot of my memories start around that age of 12 or 13, also because I started keeping journals at that age. And everything is really clear in my journals. I wrote quite a bit, and it's actually quite painful to look back in those journals and read some of what I wrote. But I had a longing. I was searching for validation, for approval, for acceptance, for guidance, for all of that. Of course, at that time, I can just see it now looking back, but at the time I didn't know. I just was kind of wayward back then. I wanted somebody back then to tell me that I was okay, just the way I was. I wanted anyone to tell me that I was wonderful and just perfect. I was just looking for one person, I think, to love me for who I am, just the way I was. Just the way Colin Firth describes to Renee Zellweger and Bridget Jones's Diary that he loves her just as she is. I know that's kind of a funny comparison, but it's true. All your flaws and everything. Mine were put under a microscope. I was told all the time how wrong I was. Everything about me was wrong and not good enough. But I was really coming up empty by the age of 13 and looking all around me at everybody else who was acceptable and approved and lovely. And I felt so alone and so wrong and so much like a reject, I told you about how it was in my house growing up when we were all in school together, and what morning preparation for school looked like. That was miserable. And every day I left for school and started out on the wrong foot. I was angry, I was frustrated, I was stressed, and so on. So at some point in time in my preteen years, I actually began to look to others, not consciously, but adults and peers alike. I was reaching for this validation or approval. And one early adult who did play a major role, unbeknownst to her, in giving me validation that I needed and in boosting my self-confidence and self-love was my 6th grade art teacher. And she was doing this art teaching as a side job. I believe she had a full-time regular job with a local newspaper. And she didn't know me. She didn't know my family other than the name. She had no reason to favor me or anything like that. There was no connection to her outside of the school at all. But I will say, when I was little, one of my favorite things to do was watch Bob Ross paint on Saturday mornings. I would be glued to the TV with my cereal bowl in the morning on Saturday morning. It was my favorite show to watch. And I absolutely loved who he was as a person. And I remember when I was a little girl, so this, what I'm getting at with the art and stuff like that in 6th grade is, this goes back to my little years. So when my dad had the job with his brothers, when I was about 4, 5, 6, something like that, 4 to 6, 5 to 7, something like that, he used to bring home the ends of the paper rolls that they used for packing materials, because it was going to be a moving business. and he'd bring the ends of the packing paper rolls. It was just newsprint, and the rolls were big, probably, 3 feet long, and it was just newsprint on a big roll. But I could spread a big, 6-foot piece of paper out on the dining room table or on the floor or whatever, and draw and draw and draw and draw until my heart's content. Markers, crayons, pencils, you name it. And I would doodle elaborate schemes and scenes of castles and moats and rivers and mountains and trees and tree houses and forts and all kinds of stuff, fantasy scenes. I loved that. I loved that when I was a kid. And in 6th grade, my art teacher just happened to see something in me, a talent, and nurtured it in me and encouraged me. So this naturally, of course, got me all excited because I loved it anyway. And so I started submitting pictures into contests and designing program covers for the school and painting signs and all kinds of stuff. And this was a lot of positive reinforcement for me because I found a lot of success in my art. And my art teacher believed in me. And I loved art, so it worked out really well. So when it came time to go to high school, I enrolled in art classes, and I took art classes freshman, sophomore, junior year. I took art all the way through high school. But of course, during my junior year in high school, when it came time for me to begin seriously looking at my future, which of course involved going to college, because that's what you're supposed to do, according to my dad, what for, I had no clue. Other than art. That was the obvious answer to me. I didn't really need to do a whole lot of searching because art was where it was at. That's all I ever wanted to do. But my dad made it very clear to me early on that art was not a career. There was no way I was going to be able to pay bills or make some sort of living out of art if that's what I decided to go to school for. He said, that's not a real career. I had to choose a real career. And I just stood against a brick wall. I had no clue what else to look at, what else to go for, what else to do. I didn't want to do anything else except art. I remember at a college night my junior year where a bunch of colleges have representatives come to the school and you get to go from person to person to person and find out all about the courses they have to offer. There was a representative there at college night from this art school that I wanted to go to in the state where I live, and that's the booth that I spent the most time at, and I desperately wanted to go to that college, but it was a private college and very expensive. But I hoped that I could get most of my education paid for through like grants and scholarships and submitting maybe a portfolio or something. I didn't know what else I could do. And probably I'd have to borrow money, but at that time I really didn't have a problem with that. I just kind of was like focused on achieving my dreams and pursuing my passion. But when I went to my parents, my dad was vehemently no. Now, in my mom's defense, she would not have had the slightest clue what it would have taken to get me to this school. So her hands were kind of tied. And I knew that then. I really was focused on my dad, but he blatantly said no. He didn't offer to look into the school or to find out how much it would cost or how much I'd have to take out in loans or if they would accept a portfolio for a scholarship or anything like that. He made it very clear that there was no future in art, period. So as a result, I never received the slightest bit of assistance or help or guidance from my parents, specifically from my dad, regarding anything having to do with my passion and my future as a pair. Art was not going to be it. That was clear. I had no clue what I was going to do, but I also had no clue that I could just do this on my own and go to the school for help or the college, the high school or the college. I didn't know that I could just buck my dad and say, screw him. I'm going to go to college for art and I'm going to make a success of myself. My dad had raised us to be very dependent on him. As time passed, my dad kept hinting that I need to figure out what I was going to do after graduation. and so on and so forth, and how important it was about college and yada, yada, yada. And I was completely lost. I had no interest in doing anything else, but it was clear he wanted me to go to college. So I figured I'd figure it out when I got there. So I was like, whatever. And I think that he like wanted me to step up and say I was going to be a doctor or something and get my PhD in, rocket science or something like that. But anything that had status, title, six figures, things like that would have been approved by him. But anything vague like art, God forbid I should move to New York and have a phenomenal career as an art dealer or a gallery, whatever. There are so many careers available for people with art degrees. It's just pathetic, especially when you have a passion and can practice and work on your talent, as I have found. So as the time grew closer and closer, where I had to make a decision about this college thing, my dad made sure to threaten that if I did not go to college, he would have no choice but to charge me rent for living at home. Like, never mind giving me some time after I graduate to figure out what direction I want to take my life. No, I'm still a junior, the end of my junior year in high school. And I'm 16 or 15. Well, no, it would have been 16. I have no clue what I want to do. You've already squished the one passion and dream I have. I have no desire to do anything else. And you want me to find the answer like that and threaten me with, well, you're going to have to pay rent if you're going to live at home and not go to college. And so I was like, okay, if I'm going to be living at home and paying rent, I've got to find a full-time job as soon as I get out of high school. And then if I find a full-time job, I got to get a car to get back and forth to the job. Then I got to be paying the rent, the car, welcome to adulthood, never mind your fun youth, of course. So it was very clear to me that my only option after graduation was college. Like, that was the only option. And so I basically went to college to get out of my parents' house and avoid paying rent. I didn't put two and two together. He didn't tell me what my options were. He didn't help guide me. It was like, you do this or else. And you pick something I approve of, even though you're going to be the one doing the work and it's your future at stake. As I'm saying this out loud, I'm just like, what a friggin' asshole. Sorry, French, but oh my gosh. So of course I had to pick a college that he approved of too, obviously, and study what he approved of, obviously, as I've mentioned. And so I did the easiest thing for me to do, and that was pick his alma mater and his course of study. So I went to his college that he had graduated from, and I went for teaching because he graduated with a teaching degree. And his major was math and his minor was political science. But he only did that for a couple of years out of college, like I mentioned in a prior video, because he couldn't get along with the parents of the students he taught. So now that was acceptable for him at the time. As soon as I announced that, I received incredibly positive reinforcement and lots of support. He worked very hard on that financial aid paperwork and sat at the table night after night for hours at a time and expected me to sit with him too, even though I just sat there like this. Because I understood none of it and I wasn't interested in any of it. I didn't want to go to that college. I didn't want to study he just made me. So I was like, okay, whatever. I was just a slug, really. And my heart and soul basically was hundreds of miles away at an art college. My hopes and dreams deflated. All of the encouragement and support that I had received from that 6th grade art teacher and my high school art teacher that I had for 4 years, which had built me up so greatly and had made me feel so good and so proud about myself and had built up my passion for art and my talent that had set my soul on fire, just became smoldering embers by this point. Smoldering embers. Now, when I went to college, I did enroll in an art class, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough. When I think back on that time, I think part of my soul died again for the second time in my life. The first time was when I was 13 and my dad slapped me. I slapped him back and then he pinned me on the floor and crushed me. he was going to get control of me physically or else. And I must succumb. It may sound a little bit dramatic or romantic, but ever since I've rekindled my passion for art about 4 or 5 years ago, I have felt a resurgence from my soul, from the inside of me, that I do remember from my childhood. That passion, that excitement, it's a part of me that I haven't been intimate with since I was a little child. It has been gone for so long. And it came about strongly when I first started therapy too. And I do think that it's related, that the rekindling of that part of my soul that had been crushed back then has actually helped me and aided me on this healing journey that I've been in the last couple of years. So I think it's kind of ironic that now, as I'm healing, I'm doing my art almost every day in some form or fashion, and encompassing every aspect from painting to photography to jewelry making to rock polishing and gemstone polishing and collection, and I mean art of every kind. And it gives me such joy. And I'm running my own business now. And I think that it's quite ironic and very obvious, the kind of story I'm telling, when my dad, who knows that I run an art business and do this summer market in my community where I sell my art, never asks me how it's going with my art or what I've created recently, or can he see pictures or samples of recent work, or how the selling is going, or how successful, or anything like that. But he has been adamant about this last job I had for 10 months out of the area, and why my picture wasn't on the website and all that other stuff. And then now with the job I have, where he recently asked me how my job was and was seriously, visually and audibly disappointed when I just said, oh, it's good. Because that's not normal for me. Normally, I would go on and on and on and on and on, telling him all about the work and how wrong everybody is and how the job means everything and I'm so important and I know everything there is to know about the job and blah, blah, blah. But I said, it's paying the bills. That's it. Really, it's just a job. And then the subject of my art did happen to come up because I do this market, and my sister sometimes does it with her stuff, not art, but she does something else. And the subject came up between the three of us recently when we gathered for Father's Day. The market came up. We were even talking about the art. In fact, that day, I gave my sister, in front of my dad, her and her husband, a piece of my art and a painting of mine that my brother-in-law actually said, wow, I really like that one. And my sister actually pointed it out as one of her favorites. And I gave it to him for a housewarming gift. And my dad said nothing about it. Never said, oh, let me look at that. Oh, how beautiful. Or, oh, you could hang it there. Or how nice of you to give that to them. Or, oh, your talent is so good. You've always been such a good artist. Nothing. Nothing from my dad about the piece of artwork that I gave my sister and her husband as a housewarming gift. Nothing about how is my booth doing. He doesn't care about what I care about. So again, you know, we've done a section of this series about my parents and their past and their upbringing. We got into the dynamic between me and my two older brothers and a little bit about me with my younger siblings. And now we're talking about me and what I dealt with myself amongst my family with different people. And this was my experience from very early on with the one passion I've had since I was a child, since I was a little child, art, which I love, which my dad has poo-pooed since the early days. And this is very sad and very hurtful for me. As I'm talking about it out loud, I feel like sobbing because my dad has hurt me greatly over this. I'm on my own now. I'm a grown woman. I'm going to do my art. It's my thing. You know, screw him. But I cannot believe the opportunities I may have missed out on in the future and the career that I could have had and what might have been had my dad just encouraged me and supported me and believed in me and empowered me. Healing is wonderful because I release all those bad feelings. I'm a much better person now, and I have found my soul again. Thank you so much for joining me on this video number 19 in the series on abuse and toxic people, clearly. Stay tuned for more and make sure to take care of you. Bye, guys.